I'm Jo Beckwith. I go by Footless Jo online. I am a YouTuber and a content creator, public speaker. A few years ago, I lost my leg after fighting to save it for about 15 years after a horseback riding accident. I was a horse girl my whole life. I was homeschooled and a horse girl. It's just kind of a double whammy of being a nerd. And I started volunteering at a barn that was pretty close to my house. So I'd spend every afternoon there, and I would work to kind of not afford lessons, but to be able to ride every once in a while. And there was one day in the middle of the summer, I was about 13, and it was my first opportunity to take horses with my friends out of the barn and actually go on a trail ride. So we did that, but the horse that I was on was an ex-race horse. She was a thoroughbred. She really liked going fast in open spaces, and I was not a very talented rider. And so she took off when the other horses took off and actually stumbled, and then I went over her shoulder, and that's kind of how I shattered my ankle. I feel like horses are, when I rode horses before, like in an arena, they're familiar with it, they know it, they're pretty responsive, there aren't a ton of other distractions necessarily. But when you give a horse that is kind of bred to run an open field with no restrictions and you ask it to start moving, like she started flying, right? Like it's what they're built to do. One of the things that I noticed was that, you know, asking her to slow down or whatever wasn't something that she wanted to do. It felt like this horse was back in its element, and she was like, I'm just gonna do what I wanna do and you're along for the ride, you know? I definitely had fear before I fell because I realized I wasn't in control of that ride, especially because the other horses that I was riding with were in front of her. And so I got the feeling that she wanted to be with them, right? So she's really going fast. And at that particular gallop, I knew I didn't have any control. And so I was genuinely just kind of holding on and waiting until either they slowed down or something else occurred. But there definitely was a lot of fear because I realized I was on top of an animal with an incredible amount of power, and I was a 13-year-old girl who was not that good of a rider. It is very much like a car crash or any kind of traumatic event where time warps, because I remember so specifically the moment that I lost my balance, like something felt different in her step, because I think she tripped a little bit. And that was enough to throw me off balance. And I remember kind of very slowly feeling like I was going over her right shoulder. And then time kind of stopped. And then I remember hitting the ground kind of on the back of my shoulders, almost where my neck was. I remember hitting the ground, and then I know I lost consciousness for at least a few seconds, because when I kind of came to, my friends were like running up to me and they were like way far ahead. And I remember I'd fallen off a horse before. Like, it happens. Injuries can occur. If you're gonna ride horses, you're gonna fall off at some point. And I thought I was okay. I really did. So like they came over, they were super freaked out, and I'm sure I was reassuring them like, no, I'm good. And I went to stand up, and that's when everything, like I was still conscious, but like everything went black. I think when the blood rushed down to my ankle, which had been very badly broken, that's when the pain set in, and that's when I was like, oh my God, something is not good, is not right. And I had to sit back down, and they had to call in to get a golf cart into the middle of the field to get me out. Someone actually saw the horse, and I think they called the police. They called someone to kind of like come help. The horse was totally fine, thank God. But I was brought out of the field in this golf cart. My mom was waiting there, and she brought me to an urgent care. And they actually turned me away because they were busy. So they were like, go home. They had no idea the extent of things at all. But by the time I got back home from being sent home from urgent care, I was in so much pain. That's when like all the adrenaline, everything all had worn off. And so my mom was kind of like, screw this, we're gonna go back. And we ended up going to a different ER. They brought me in. I remember the doctors genuinely kind of being excited over my x-rays, and you never want a doctor to be excited over your scans or x-rays because it wasn't something that they had seen before, and they called in like other doctors to be like, hey, check this out, because what had happened was the end of my tibia, which is that big bone in your lower leg, had broken off, like a significant chunk of it, and then had been shoved up like an inch into my leg, but it was so swollen that they couldn't do anything. So they sent me home with medication for 3 days to have the swelling go down, because I guess if things are too swollen, they like can't close the tissue back up. The first surgery that I had was 3 days after the horseback riding accident. It was a complicated break, but in theory, surgery should have been fine. Like, it should have fixed it. I went back 2 months later to the surgeon. They took x-rays and told me that it had not healed. Like, there was still a fracture in it. Something had occurred for whatever reason. So they were gonna have to re-break the ankle, reset it, go through surgery again. And I remember that was pretty crushing as a teenager, right? Like, surgery was scary, having to go through this again, being on crutches again. Little did I know that was like the very, very beginning, because after that second surgery, I was still in pain, still had issues, and that ushered in surgery after procedure for the next, it was 14 years worth of more surgeries and procedures than I actually kept count of. It's close to 20, somewhere between like 15 and 25, where I felt like my life was very much dictated by that next surgery or that recovery period. When I was 15, they fused my ankle, which means they literally took out the ankle joint and screwed my foot to my leg. There was still motion and I could still kind of look like I was walking normally, because there's joints in your foot that can kind of compensate for it. And I still tried to be very active. I still did sports. I still pursued whatever I wanted to pursue. I was just in a lot of pain doing it. And that did cause a lot of wear and tear on the rest of my foot and ankle. And it also just never, for whatever reason, healing never went the way that it was supposed to. I couldn't tell you why. Doctors couldn't tell you why. But I just kept having issue after issue and surgery after surgery. And so by the time I hit 28, I was pretty done with that ankle. The way things went in general, like, none of it was normal. And again, I don't really know why. The first surgery should have gone fine. Bummer that didn't work. The second surgery should have fixed it, and it just didn't. But I think that there was just a lot of damage to that area at a time where my body was still growing, which I imagine had an impact as well. Realistically, I knew that I would probably be facing amputation at some point in my life, but it was very much a when I'm like 60 years old kind of thing. It wasn't something that I was thinking about in the near future. It was something I joked about a lot, like, let's just chop it off, right? Until that became reality. I was in a lot of physical pain all of the time. I was often on crutches or limping around. And again, surgery to surgery, kind of my life was marked by these surgical dates or medical appointments. I couldn't run, so I couldn't play like soccer like I used to. I started weightlifting instead, and then eventually I got into boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, MMA as a whole. I did a lot of things through pain, a lot of things the doctors were like, yeah, you can do it, like, give it a shot. If you can deal with it, okay. But so much of it came at such a great cost to me. I still wanted to do it. I still wanted to participate in life and pursue the things I wanted to do, but the cost was way higher than it would be for anyone else. So there were many times where, like, I had to sit out of practice because I stepped on it the wrong way, or because I, turned my hip and my ankle hit the bag slightly differently than it was supposed to. I did push through a lot of that, but there were many times where it was like, I can't walk. I can't do this. I would say in the 2 or 3 years before I actually had to go through the amputation is when it became so painful. If I moved the wrong way, even if I was like sitting down and, if you're just like, stretching your ankle, you're rolling it around, like, even if I moved it slightly the wrong way, it was an extraordinary amount of pain, let alone like walking and trying to do things. It got to the point where I couldn't really pretend super well anymore. I was still doing stuff, I was still trying to, but it was becoming not worth it. I had to stop doing jiu-jitsu. I could barely walk my dogs. My life was entirely controlled by pain. And I was also, from a very young age, on a lot of really heavy medication. And so at like 27, I was on so many medications and looking towards the future being like, I'm probably gonna die from this. Not like, I'm not talking about like, but like, this has a really negative effect on the rest of my body, like my kidney and my liver. Like, there's so much helpful poison, right? Like, I needed it to survive, that is coursing through my veins, but it was, I knew that it was going to have a very bad effect on the rest of my body over time. So I got into this college in Indiana. I really loved it there. The education was amazing. But after a year, I had to drop out and come home because the pain was so high. Like, I needed help, I needed support, I needed my parents, and they were amazing. I could date, I had friends, I could be fairly reliable, but again, it came at such a cost. It takes so much energy to try to have normal social interaction when you are in pain. There was an incredible amount of support. And I also had very good friends, a couple very good friends and families in my life who were there to support however they could. I was 27 when the amputation actually occurred. I remember I always joked with friends, especially when I had like, oh, now I have to have another surgery. Oh, that one didn't work. Okay, I guess we're doing another one. I joked about I should just take my leg off. I should just cut it off thing. That became not a joke in my head far before I verbalized it to anyone else. But when I was like 26, going on 27-ish is when I had really had it. Everything that I loved doing it had all been slowly taken away from me over time. Like I couldn't do any combat sports anymore aside from jiu-jitsu, and I love jiu-jitsu. That's what I, devoted everything to, but that became so painful to do that it was barely worth it. I've gone through a lot of physical pain in my life. Like I've had my leg cut off twice because it didn't work the first time. Like it's painful, but the pain that I remember the most is that ankle joint pain, like when it clicked the wrong way and it would just set everything off. January of 2018, I had another ankle surgery. The new surgeon with like a new cool injection thing, and they were trying out some plasma. I don't know. We were just throwing anything at it, right? I went to the surgical follow-up a couple months later, and the doctor walked in. It was a very short appointment and was like, hey, how's it feeling? And I was like, it's really not improved. It was actually worse, at least so far. And he was like, well, that's a bummer. There's nothing else I can do for you. Like it was very much just like and honestly, I appreciate his honesty. I appreciate his response. He didn't try to like give me false hope and be like, yeah, we could, whatever. Because he was like, there's nothing in my skill set that could help this. So I'm sorry it didn't work. And that moment, I think in particular, I kind of needed to hear because I had gone through, again, so many surgeries trying to make things better and they never did. But I had to hold on to that hope of like, okay, maybe the next one. Okay, maybe they have something in the works. Okay, maybe next year. And for someone to be like, yeah, I got nothing, I think was very important for me to sort of acknowledge the reality of the situation and that I was very much holding on to a hope that wasn't realistic and was incredibly emotionally painful to try to hold on to, right? And that's when I started thinking more seriously about amputation, and I certainly didn't just like go straight to that, right? I saw a number of different surgeons, looked at many different options. I started speaking with my therapist about it and being like, is this a crazy thing to consider? What should I be looking out for? Eventually talked to a surgeon, and I remember he sort of suggested it, but very like, the other thing we could do is amputation. And I was like, cool, sounds great. Not in the moment, but like internally, I was like, yes, that's actually what I want. I think my mind was made up pretty quickly because trying to envision a life where I kept my ankle felt like looking down a dark tunnel just into death, right? And amputation sounded incredibly terrifying, but it felt like a glimmer. It felt like a glimmer of light. And so internally, I was like, I have to follow the path where there's hope, where there's at least a chance. I walked into the hospital up in Denver very intentionally. I didn't want to use crutches. I didn't want to do anything like that. But the day of the amputation, I was like, I'm going to walk in on my own two legs and I'm going to be wheeled out a few days later without one of them. In the days prior to that, I took my ankle on like a goodbye tour. I like went walking in the mountains and went barefoot as many places I could and like put my feet in snow and water and try to like remember all those sensations. And then the night before amputation, I had all my like close friends and family members sign goodbye notes on my ankle, which was a super, it was a great way of kind of processing some of that. When I walked into the hospital, waited in the surgical room to get called back to have my leg chopped off. It's still very surreal looking back. When I woke up from the amputation surgery, I felt everything, which was really awful. I was in, I think, the most pain I could imagine being in. And it took them quite a while to get things under control, because once you're in that much pain, it's not like you can inject just like one thing and be good. I remember still thinking like, I'm so glad this is done. I'm so glad it's over. They kept me in the hospital for a few days for pain management, watching out for infections, anything like that. And then they just send you home without your leg, which still seems super crazy to me, but we'd kind of prepared our house the best that we could, and I went home to recover. It was like 2 weeks until they took the cast off, and then another 2 weeks until another thing. And I got fitted for a prosthetic leg at about like 8 weeks because they want to start that process. It's certainly not completed, but they want to kind of get you moving, things like that. But it was a lot of downtime, a lot of recovery. They did the amputation, and then I actually had a fall in a restaurant like 8 weeks after amputation, like directly on the end of that like healing part of my body, and it fractured what was trying to heal. It took them a long time to figure that out. I had another surgery because there were other issues with it, and then eventually they did a CT and were like, oh, the bones are actually like, there's actually a fracture in there, which explains why you're still in a lot of pain and can't use your prosthetic. So they went in and they redid the amputation. They took off like another 1.5 inches of my leg. I was able to actually heal correctly from. They redid the type of amputation that it was initially. It was something called an urdle, where you have like your leg bones, right? And then they took a piece of a bone and put it right there. So they just removed that bone entirely, cut the other 2 bones, brought everything up about like 1.5 inches. And phantom pain, it can be pretty severe, especially at the start, and it certainly was for me. Making the transition to like living life as an amputee comes with pretty constant adjustments. Comes with pretty constant life adjustments in general. Learning to walk was the first step. So you try to get a prosthetic leg to fit right, but there's swelling, so it's a long process. I started the process of learning how to walk again about 8 weeks after that last surgery, and that went pretty well. I was able to start walking around on a leg again, which was very cool. I was able to get back to things like hiking and walking. Again, those come at a cost because there is pain still, but it's very different than the type of pain that I was in before. And a dream that I had had since I was like 13 or 14 was being able to run again. I was given a running blade by a good friend of mine. We're like a similar size, so she's like, all right, let's just try it. And then I eventually had a running leg made, and I was able to run again. The mental and emotional process of adjusting to such a major change in your life, to being visibly disabled, to, all of the adjustments that take place, it is still mentally exhausting, especially when you're learning. I think for me, and one of the reasons why I continued sharing my journey on YouTube, on social media, was there was very much a narrative when I was looking into becoming an amputee, or like in the first weeks of being an amputee, where I saw a lot of public speakers or, big names who had lost limbs, who were on big stages being like, my life is awesome now, right? Like I did it, kind of like top of the mountain, very inspiring. And then I would find stories of people who like never wanted to leave their house again. And my experience was very much in the middle, and I didn't feel like there was a lot of conversation around that. The journey is very difficult and has super awesome highs and really difficult lows. And so to try to be honest with myself and the people around me through that, and to try to normalize that, like for me, because it's not a process I had ever gone through before, it was something I was very committed to, because so much of my life had been pretty shut down emotionally, and I didn't want to fall into the trap of just being like, everything's great again. At first, it was incredibly terrifying, because I'm like, oh my God, I'm missing a part of my body. This feels weird. I hate everything in jiu-jitsu. But then being like, oh, I can get out of things that no one else can do, and I can put people in different kind of positions and locks that no one else can do. So figuring out how to use my body as a weapon in that sport was one of my favorite things ever. I always want to give a different story, especially in interviews. I still want to be like, and it's great now. But like there's certainly lows. I do still have a lot of pain. It's to a lesser extent, and I kind of know how to control it a little bit better. And I think I have been able to adjust to the social aspects of it really well. I've had support, I've made a lot of choices on my end to be like, this is not something I'm gonna hide or try to be ashamed of, but there certainly are moments of like a lot of vulnerability, a lot of feeling different than other people. I've been able to overcome and connect with people over, but there are still moments when it's very difficult. And also realizing that this is forever, right? Like my life will always look different than perhaps I wanted it to look. It'll always look different than the average human experience. And that's going to come with like a lot of insights and experiences that other people don't have, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Some people are uncomfortable with the word disabled, right? And sometimes I think people don't know, like, can I say that? Is this a disability? I am disabled, and that is a word I have completely embraced because it's just an accurate statement. For me, all that it means is that like I exist in a world that is primarily built for a different type of person. Like this world is built for people, generally speaking, who have 2 legs that work the way that they should. That doesn't mean that there's anything like wrong or broken with me. It just means that like the abilities that I have or do not have are different than other people. But also, If we're scared to say that word, we make it like a derogatory thing, and it's just not. It's an acknowledgement of the reality that the abilities I have are different and in some ways lessened than the average member of the population. Of all of the things that I have experienced in my life, and losing a leg is pretty severe, but is not even like the most traumatic thing that I've gone through. I think loneliness and feeling like alone or isolated, or I'm the only person who's thinking this or feeling this, has been the most dangerous thing that I've probably ever encountered in my own mind. Coming to the realization that if you look for connection, if you say the thing out loud, if you're looking for community, if you're wanting that connection, I promise you, no matter what it is that's going on in your head, you're not the only person who's thinking or feeling that. And there are people who get it, and there is help, and there is understanding. And sometimes it takes a little while to find it. It's not always going to be the first person or the first resource, but you're not alone. I would always encourage people to try to be authentic with yourself about what you're feeling, because if you're trying to put on a show for yourself or for other people, you're denying yourself getting help that you might actually need. Honestly, for a solid decade of my life, if not a lot more than that, but my entire 20s, I was dealing with a lot of depression and also PTSD and just not wanting to be alive all of the time. What transitioned me to this point was years of getting honest with myself, sharing what was really going on with the people around me, finding safe people to talk to about that, finding people who understood, resources through like books or groups, therapy, if it is something that can be accessed in any way. That has been a life-saving thing for me. Medication as well. Taking any kind of antidepressant or anything for anything going on in my brain was something that the culture that I came from was very shamed. So I didn't for a while, but it's great. Like it's been a helpful tool. Now I'm 33, still missing a leg. I haven't grown it back yet. Really a bummer. I've been trying to, but I really enjoy the life that I've built. I love going to concerts and dancing. It's one of my favorite things. And it's incredible to me that I can be up on my leg for sometimes hours at a time. I'm really happy, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy with the choices I've been able to make, and super grateful for the support that has enabled me to be where I am now.